DC establishment wants to remove Trump because he is trying to end the endless wars in Syria, Ukraine, and elsewhere. Hello, this is Robert Romano, Vice President of Public Policy with Americans for Limited Government, dailytorch.com. Hit that subscribe button. Today we're going to be talking about the Democrats' quest to impeach President Donald Trump, and I think it's the reason for it is because he's trying to end endless wars. I think it's fitting that they want to. The stated reason so far is that President Trump temporarily withheld military assistance to Ukraine leading up to his conversation with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky on July 25. A week before that, Trump and the Office of Management and Budget put a temporary freeze pending a review by the Defense and State Departments. And now the Ukrainians were unaware of this pause in military assistance, and ultimately it was reapproved. It was re-upped on September 11, kind of rendering the issue moot. But I think it's telling that it's military assistance to Ukraine that is compelling now, and potentially pausing it or canceling it is the reason now Democrats say they want to remove President Donald Trump from office. And the reason I say that is because one of the reasons President Trump won the election in 2016 was because he stated that he was going to, he didn't want to be in Syria. He wanted to end these endless wars. Now a joint study by Dr. Douglas Kriner and Dr. Francis Shen called Battlefield Casualties and Ballot Box Defeat. Did the Obama-Bush wars cost Clinton the White House? And what they found in the study was that, and they referred to prior studies too, and this, from looking at the Civil War, the Korean and Vietnam Wars, as well as the Iraq Wars, that there's a strong correlation between states that had higher casualty rates and that tended to vote against incumbents and who were associated with the wars. And 2016 was no different. The study stated, quote, "We find that there is a significant and meaningful relationship between a community's rate of military sacrifice and its support of Trump. Our statistical model suggests that if three states key to Trump's victory, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, had suffered even a modestly lower casualty rate, all three could have flipped from red to blue and sent Hillary Clinton to the White House." And so maybe that's why so many people want to get rid of President Trump, and they want him to fight the wars, or that they say to fight, or else, even though they're not voting to authorize military force in Syria or Ukraine or anywhere else, as you would if you were following the process under Article 1, Section 8 of the U.S. Constitution. Now, how much of a difference would have lower casualty rates made in the 2016 election per the study? In each state, our analysis predicts that, quote, that Trump would have lost between 1.4% and 1.6% of the vote if the state had suffered a lower casualty rate. Such margins would have easily flipped all three states into the Democratic column. Trump's ability to connect with voters in communities exhausted by more than 15 years of war have been critically important to his narrow election victory. And so this could happen again in 2020. Looking at tweets from former Americans for Limited Government President and current Market Research Foundation President Bill Wilson, he was commenting on a September 5 and 6 YouGov study. And he found that, quote, real Donald Trump's favorability among women almost doubled when he congratulated presidential assistant Jason Greenblatt on his work seeking peace between Israel and Palestine. 38% to 71% who were okay with that statement amongst females in the latest YouGov survey. You can get a closer look here. That his job approval amongst females was not so high, but when you ask, do you approve this statement, where President Trump thanked Greenblatt for his dedication and to seeking peace between Israel and the Palestinians, won't be forgotten. He will be missed. Thank you, Jason. And this is why Wilson then writes, real Donald Trump's reelection may in fact hinge on deepening his non-interventionist policies, fighting the warmonger neocons, and bringing our troops home. And I think that's true. In fact, if you go back and look at when this whole Russiagate conspiracy theory began, it was right about the time President Trump adopted the Michael Flynn position on cooperating with Russia on counterterrorism issues to kill Islamic State. We've covered this before, where Michael Flynn went to Moscow in December of 2015 for a Russia Today event. It was like an anniversary or something, and he does a on live public interview with a Russian journalist. And he's talking about cooperating with Russia on potential counterterrorism issues. And he said this back and forth, quote, "I do appreciate it. I respect it. We have to have this debate. I love to have this debate. We absolutely have to have this debate, and we have to have it now. The United States," and I'm speaking really as a private citizen, the United States can't sit there and go, Russia, you're bad, and Russia can't sit there and say, the U.S., you're bad. We have to do like we've done in the past, and I could go into a couple of historical examples where Europe would not be the Europe that it is today thriving had it not been for Russia and the United States working together 75 years ago, where we have worked together. So this idea of us not being able to work together is a misnomer. And I think we have to step back and we have to say, okay, what are the common interests, and then what are the common goals that we want to achieve? And those goals, I believe the number one goal is to eliminate the cancerous idea that exists inside of the Islamic religion. We must do it. And he talks about, basically cooperating in the Middle East is to keep, quote, to keep some level of stability in the Middle East that creates a new set of economic conditions to deal with these 15 to 35-year-old men that exist. And so this idea was adopted by President Trump on the campaign trail. And right about that time is when this Russiagate conspiracy theory, they start publicly, officials and Democrats are saying that Trump is too cozy to Vladimir Putin and all of this nonsense. And it led to this 3-year-long investigation. It started with the DNC and Hillary Clinton campaign hired former British spy Christopher Steele to make these allegations that Trump was a bought and paid for Russian agent, that he had been basically recruited and cultivated by Russian intelligence for years. He also alleged that the Trump campaign was involved in the hacking of the DNC server and putting the emails onto WikiLeaks, that the hacking had occurred with, quote, the full knowledge and support of Trump and senior members of his campaign. This led to the FISA warrants against the Trump campaign by the Justice Department and intelligence agencies. Turns out they were pursuing a conspiracy theory, and we know that from Special Counsel Robert Mueller's 2019 report. This happens 3 years after the spying began, and what he found was, quote, the investigation did not establish that members of the Trump campaign conspired or coordinated with the Russian government in its election interference activities, and, quote, the evidence does not establish that the president was involved in an underlying crime related to Russian election interference. Now, ironically, so just as the U.S. is pulling troops out of Syria, one of the greatest strikes against Islamic State occurred where this Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, he's the founder of Islamic State, and he was killed. And it proved that the U.S. could exercise force in the region, even if it didn't have troops stationed in northern Syria along the Syrian-Turkish border. So, you can strike from elsewhere, or that force presence wasn't necessary in order to strike at al-Baghdadi and his lieutenants. And so you can use force when necessary, but you don't have to be necessarily in Syria. And I think that's a good approach, and it may be helping to resolve the civil war in Syria. In the meantime, critics like Saturday Night Live, while this raid is going on, while they're killing Baghdadi, they're running a skit that says that Trump, by pulling out of Syria, was creating jobs for Islamic State. It's somewhat humorous, but I don't know when Saturday Night Live became such a warmongering program, but I guess whatever Trump is for, they're against it, even if it's spreading peace and ending endless wars. And now another unfortunate was that the slight was that by leaving Syria, the Kurds would be slaughtered by Turkey, but instead the U.S. was able to almost immediately get a ceasefire between the Kurds and Turkey and now Syria and Russia are cooperating with that ceasefire, and it may be actually bringing stability to that region. Now, as for Ukraine, President Trump has been supportive of Ukrainian efforts, I think, to end the civil war there. He's supporting President Volodymyr Zelensky. There's a 5-year civil war going on there that we helped to start in part when we backed the overthrow of Viktor Yanukovych, the Ukrainian president, in 2014. And it apparently was to get a European Union Ukraine trade deal passed. And we've covered this before. It was the Ukraine-European Union Association Agreement. Yanukovych didn't want to do it, even though his advisor, Paul Manafort, was saying that you should do the agreement. And the end result was that there was a coup. Yanukovych gets overthrown and impeached, and he has to flee. He flees to Russia, and then a U.S.-friendly regime is installed, and then they approve the trade deal. And then a few years later, the civil war is wearing on. Oh, by the way, Russia annexed Crimea and some of the eastern provinces. You've had some attempts to get peace agreements with the Minsk protocols. But this war has been ongoing. And so I think President Trump would like to end it. And that's probably one of the reasons why he was pausing military assistance to Ukraine, so that they could get a better read on the new Ukrainian president. Who I think is doing a very good job, but apparently the National Security Council doesn't think so, and they want President Trump removed. The Intelligence Committee, Democrats in Congress, they don't want to have peace with Russia, between Ukraine and Russia. Well, maybe they should go talk to the Ukrainian president about that. Ukraine leader, this is on October 10th, he says, a meeting with Putin is key if we want to end the war in the Donbass region. This is a CNBC report. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky said a direct meeting must happen with Russian President Vladimir Putin if a 5-year conflict between pro-Russian rebels and Ukraine's armed forces is to end. Speaking to reporters Thursday, Zelensky said discussions would be needed, quote, if we want to end the war, and said the date of a possible meeting with Putin depended on Russia. The meeting would have to take place under the so-called Normandy format, in which representatives from Russia, Ukraine, Germany, and France come together to try to resolve the conflict in the Donbass region in eastern Ukraine. He also said that there could be elections in the Donbass region, provided that the armed forces, I think, are withdrawn on the Russian side, and so this could be helping to end the conflict. Here it is. Zelensky said, this is from Forbes, Zelensky said that once troop settlements were taken care of, then Kiev will allow elections in parts of the Donbass occupied by separatists, quote. So that's a really good thing. I think that President Trump wants to support these efforts with Zelensky and try to get a meeting between him and Putin, and hopefully that this can help resolve the conflict. And this is why President Trump was elected, I think, to keep America out of wars and to try to improve U.S.-Russian relations. Well, what's wrong with that? Well, we had a much better relationship with the Soviet Union than we have with Russia today. Remember when Reagan and Gorbachev were signing the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty? I was very young when that happened, but I studied about it in school, and that was the beginning of the end of the Cold War, and it led to the Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty, the first ever reductions in nuclear arms by the great powers, U.S. and Soviet Union at the time. It became Russia, and they're still a party to those agreements. But now the INF Treaty is disintegrated, and so that was Reagan's and Gorbachev's crowning achievement, and it's been wrecked because U.S.-Russian relations have been deteriorating. And one of the biggest reasons for that is Christopher Steele, this Fusion GPS DNC Hillary Clinton dossier that led to the Justice Department investigation and these false allegations against President Trump and his campaign that they were Russian agents, and it wasn't true. And we wasted 3 years of this country's history. We're risking war in areas like Syria and Ukraine because of this, frankly, BS conspiracy theory that our intelligence agencies and Justice Department were pursuing. and spying on the opposition party in an election year, and that got carried over into 2017. They were still spying on Trump campaign and transition and administration officials after the president was sworn into office. And then they lied to the president about the extent of the investigation. That's why James Comey, former FBI director, was fired. He should have been fired. Because this is just intolerable. How can the president be expected to do his job, carry on foreign policy, and keep us out of unnecessary, endless wars if the national security apparatus, this deep state, is basically wants to start all these wars? And I'll leave you with the close here, because I think this is an unjust impeachment process, and the reason they're doing it is because they are the war party. They just want more wars. They're warmongers, I guess, and you can tell because just look what they tried to do to Trump when he stepped out of line with their establishment narrative. In the meantime, with the ceasefire in Syria and now Zelensky saying he wants to talk to Putin, President Trump's foreign policy may actually be highly successful. That is, if he's not removed from office and then we end up in another war. And here's the close. If the D.C. swamp had its way, President Trump would be thrown out of office, and maybe Zelensky too. Maybe they'll go overthrow the government of Ukraine again if Trump is removed, so that the war policies in Syria and Ukraine can continue. That makes 2020 a choice election, again, between President Trump, who wants to keep the U.S. out of war, and the war party in Washington that wants to make certain that they never end. That's the commentary. This is Robert Romano, Vice President of Public Policy with Americans for Limited Government, dailytorch.com. Hit that subscribe button, ring the bell for notifications, and have a good day.